So given what has happened in the last 12 hours, it's now time, viewers, to get you a sense of what it's like when it comes to what the EU's voice really is as far as how things are unfolding in the Russia-Ukraine war latest. Remember, European leaders have thrown their weight behind Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but it's not so simple as that. They will now have to pick up the cudgels possibly and take now the next move, because Donald Trump is unlikely to move any forward when it comes to this war with this Ukrainian leadership. So let's get in a word from William Denselow, who's joining me live to give us a sense of what's the view like from Brussels. They've been, I'm sure they must also be watching this in complete horror, William, how things unfolded at the White House. What is the view like in Brussels?
Well, the fascinating component as far as European leaders are concerned is that this comes at the end of a week where it was really seen that there were two very successful visits to the Oval Office, first by French President Emmanuel Macron, then by UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. It was really viewed that those relationships went well. There was a lot of warmth in the room on both those occasions. That warmth seemingly eroded overnight when Ukraine's president made his trip to Washington. So now the question is, how does Europe respond? How does it try and keep Washington on board to continue the US support hand in hand with Europe for Ukraine going forward? That is something that Europeans say is desperately needed. But what we're hearing after that meeting is that Europeans' support and the EU support for Ukraine is unwavering. Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, says to Volodymyr Zelenskyy, "You are not alone." French President Emmanuel Macron says that the EU and France was right to sanction Russia 3 years ago. It was right to support Ukraine 3 years ago, and it will continue to do so. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, says that we'll continue to work with you for a just and lasting peace.
William, we are playing out all of those comments on Twitter in the graphics on our screens. But there's something I want to ask you, which is that, when Starmer was meeting Trump earlier this week, there was a question that was posed to him that without US, can you take on Putin? And that essentially now is now a larger, bigger EU issue, that without the US, how does this war move ahead between Russia and Ukraine with just the EU backing it? Can that happen? Or do you think that it would now be time for some of these leaders to now come and intervene and probably, make good on some of their political capital against Donald Trump?
Well, forgive me if this tweet is playing out on your screens at the moment, but Kaja Kallas, the Europeans' top diplomat, has said that in the wake of this meeting, it is clear that the free world needs a new leader. She says that it's up to us Europeans to take that challenge. So perhaps the most strong message from any European official after that meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy. Essentially, Kaja Kallas says the EU needs to pick up the reins. A real question is whether Europeans are in a position to do that. We have this meeting of a number of European powers meeting in London on Sunday. Then here in Brussels next Thursday, we have an emergency summit where top of the agenda will be how the Europeans can provide more support urgently to Ukraine, as well as boosting its own defence capabilities. Because let's not forget that Donald Trump and the US administration has railed against the EU and European allies in NATO for not doing enough when it comes to defence. So Europe was already facing pressure to ramp up its defence production, its defence spending, and that heat has been turned up even higher.
William, what Kaja Kallas has said, we did put that tweet out also, and that's very significant, because what that means is that this is going to now push for maybe those long pending, long delayed elections in Ukraine, new leadership to come in place, and maybe, of course, a complete reorientation of how this war has to now be dealt with. Thank you so much for speaking to me. And well, we cannot end this broadcast till the time we have a view from Washington, because at the end of the day, this not only happened in Oval Office, well, this war will not end unless and until the Trump administration is on board. And one has to agree, for better or for worse, Ukraine has very limited cards, if at all it does. And Raymond Vickery, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins me for more on this in terms of what this means. Mr. Vickery, good to have you on the show. You've been talking about whether or not there are options for Ukraine. Let me start by asking you, what happens to European diplomacy from here on? Do you think it's going to be President Macron who will have to now come in and do some mediation between President Trump and Zelenskyy?
Yes, I think that France, the United Kingdom, Germany, Poland are going to have to try to pick up the pieces, and they've already started that. This America First business, really is a rejection of Europe, and it goes back to the old great power view of the world. That great powers can resolve things and have their own spheres of influence. You don't have to worry about a UN charter. You don't have to worry about non-aggression, rule of law, those kinds of principles. It's just a might makes right approach. That led us into war in the 20th century. It will lead us to war in the 21st century unless other more principled democracies now, like India, will step up and help fill the void which has been created. And this peace is indivisible now. Eurasia is one continent. India is a part of that continent. The idea that this was a European problem and could be set aside is just wrong. China's looking at it, and we all have a stake in it.
Indeed. And, then this brings me to ask you about the US-Russia relationship. Of course, for President Putin, this could have been the best possible outcome out of that meeting. But where does the relationship between the two countries go from here? Well,
there's no question that we need to open doors with Russia. But we've had a period after the end of the Cold War in which democratic forces in Russia were allowed to participate, and we made great progress. We have to be able to get back to that. I have no objection to talking to whoever it is, including President Putin, to be able to resolve problems and get back to peace. War doesn't benefit anybody, but you can't just say, look, no matter what you've seen, there was no invasion by Russia of Ukraine. In fact, there was.
I'm afraid I'll have to leave it there, Mr. Vickery, because time is also of essence, and that's pretty much the case when it comes to this war as well.